Our job is to help create more startups. Our job is to help those startups stay at home and grow from home and ultimately have economic impact at home.
Welcome to Greater Than the Sum, the series where we demystify what it takes for small business owners in Canada and the accountants that support them to get control of their finances. I'm your host, Mark Cassini, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Plooto. Plooto is an all-in-one payment automation platform that automates your payable and receivable workflows. If you're a small business owner in Canada who's ready to take control of your finances, or an accountant looking to spend less time on manual tasks and more time as an advisor, then you're in the right place. Join me as we uncover the secret to making your business greater than the sum of its parts. Jonah, Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. This is awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to chatting with you both. Let's get right into it. If you could just share with us your names, roles, and where you work.
Sure. I'm Tim Lynn. I'm the co-founder of Startup TNT.
My name is Jonah. I am the operations lead at Startup TNT, and we're both located in very northern Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Right on, right on. Can you quickly tell me about the name Startup TNT and really how the company got off the ground originally?
Yeah. So my co-founder actually came up with the name. So TNT stands for Thursday Night Tradition. So as we were alluding to, we run a happy hour every week. So every Thursday since May 16th of 2019, there's been an event all the way through COVID. Every week, without fail, there's a thing. And so our investment summits have big events. And so those happen on Thursdays. And then we have regular happy hours, and those are on Thursdays. And during COVID, we were online hanging out on Discord, not dissimilar from this. But in any event, every Thursday, that's what we do. So yeah, Startup TNT, Thursday Night Tradition.
I love that. And that's a pretty impressive streak to maintain, right? People's busy lives and things going on through pandemics and through other global crises. Hats off to you both for being able to maintain that tradition. And I'm sure not only the people working at Startup TNT, but the partners and the companies in your portfolios, I'm sure value that time tremendously. And what would you say is Startup TNT's mission?
What we do is we rally communities together to help them collaborate and invest in their top startups, providing them the roots to be able to help them reach the world from home. And so our mission is that every community has great entrepreneurs that can create great startups. And our mission is to help them grow from where they are and help them be awesome.
That's great. Love that. And what would you say is the why behind what you both do? What motivates you?
For me, and we'll chat about it a little bit later, but I was a part of a startup before that, raising the $1 million seed round was extremely challenging. Trying to raise that, it's too big for friends and family, too small for venture. And it often is like a really critical point in a startup's life where they'll leave to go to Toronto or San Francisco or New York or Vancouver or whatever, some A-class city in search of more dollars and where the investors are. And then the investors will, then they provide them the roots to be able to be like, well, you know what, you're from city X, but really like I've got all these connections here. Like it would just be so much easier if you were here. And so then naturally, it's not like an intentional thing, but it's sort of like a frog in hot water. They end up leaving. And growing up in Edmonton, went to university here, did finance here. There's not a gigantic finance community. And so a whole pile of my friends have left. And so really why I'm doing it is to help, awesome companies grow in Edmonton for then my friends to come back to home to when they want to have families in their 30s, come back. And yeah, that's the personal why. That and like, cause it's cool to work with startups.
Yeah, of course. And that's great. I love that. And it's, coming from a smaller city myself, I definitely know what it's like to work and live in an environment where you feel that brain drain and that finance drain. So it's great to see other Canadians and other people in the space encouraging those people and that money to stay local or have arguably an outsized impact. So really excited to see that that's what gets you going. And what would you say people misunderstand most about the venture space?
I think people understand that venture is sexy and they want to do venture because it's sexy. And the thing that people misunderstand about it is that it's also just extraordinarily expensive. It's the most expensive capital in the world because it's financing high risk ventures that have a high probability of failure. And so consequently, the cost has to be high to compensate for all those losses. And the vast, vast majority of businesses are not equipped to raise venture and probably are better off not raising venture. If there's an opportunity to get revenue and have your customers pay and not have to raise money or debt or just more friendly ways of raising money, like it's an incredibly competitive space from a capital perspective.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you both sharing those answers and helping listeners get to know you both and Startup TNT a bit better. Let's shift gears and get into kind of the bigger picture of our conversation. So I'm going to ask you a number of things just around kind of the business, financial side of things, and excited to hear learnings from both of you along your respective journeys. So I'll start with my first one. What makes Startup TNT different from other angel groups or funding platforms?
One of the aspects that's a lot different is just the size of the checks that we're doing. I mean, we're doing, I think the average investor check, Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around $5,000. That's like in the venture space, that sounds like a lot of money if you're thinking about a paycheck, but if you're thinking about investment, that's tiny. I mean, that pays like one salary potentially, right? So not even that often with all the other costs. So I think that's one of the things.
Yeah, the syndication of all the small investments is huge. I mean, we've syndicated thousands of individual checks, and Jonah's been instrumental in making that happen, as is Plooto. The community-oriented nature of what we do is also a big differentiator. So our thing is that there's a series of groups that are out there, we'll name CDL or, Creative Destruction Lab, which was started in Toronto and has since proliferated across the country and internationally. They start with mentorship first. They get a tribe of mentors essentially, and it's a competitive process to narrow it down to which is, sort of like the best company and whatnot, and providing mentorship along the way. And then ultimately it sometimes leads to investment. And our approach is sort of the other side of the same coin. We start with investment. Everybody's in, like as Jonah was saying, everybody has $5,000 at stake. That's pre-committed. We're all working together to pick an awesome local startup. And then it ultimately leads sometimes to mentorship or employment, or sometimes co-founders are created or whatever. And so, yeah, that's a huge differentiator on what we do. And just like forces, by having people pre-commit, it also, changes the mentality as well. Instead of like just kicking tires and sort of like knocking people down, it's like, hey, we're in this and we're like making an investment together. And it changes that mentality to being like much more positive, which is fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, we've talked to a number of guests about, finding the right partner for various aspects of your business, whether it's accounting firm, whether it's consultancy, whether it's vendors. And it sounds like you approach it in the same way when you're talking about investments. You want, the firms that you're investing in, the partners that you're finding to really see the relationship as a partnership. What are some of the biggest challenges facing Canadian startups seeking venture capital?
I think one of the tricky things about being in Canada, there's a lot of fantastic things. One of the tricky things is that our neighbor to the south is richer and louder than us. And so to my point of people just moving south in search of capital, the capital also tends to move south because that's where allocators exist. And so people are investing south of the border, generally ignoring what happens up here. And so there's fewer firms up in Canada than there are in the States. And even Canadian firms will focus on the States to some degree as well. And so one of the biggest challenges, and this is why we're here, is raising capital. You can access the world from here. You can hire great talent from here, but it's really hard to raise money from Canada. I think that's easily the biggest challenge. That's what people run into. People spend way too long fundraising, and just generally, it's really challenging.
Yeah, I would imagine, it's a lot easier, let's say, being a smaller fish in a smaller pond than being a small fish in a absolutely massive pond by going south of the border. And you mentioned this earlier in one of your previous comments, and I'm hoping you can elaborate a bit further, but beyond just funding, what other resources and support do you provide the companies that you're working with? You mentioned mentorship. Curious if there's anything beyond that you want to share with us.
Mentorship is one of those pieces. I think another aspect of it that I think is maybe a bit more formalized is, there's some aspects of education that we're providing. And I mean, I went to school. I took some courses on like entrepreneurship and all this stuff. I don't want to put down education. Education is important. It's valuable, but there's nothing like on the job training. It's like you get a little bit of this is how you should do it. Here's a general format of how to do it, and then actually do it. There's actual investors. There's actual people around the table that want to invest in your company. It's not this maybe. It's test it out. If we're wrong, you find it out for yourself. Maybe that's not how it's going to work for you. So I think that's a huge piece. And so we do have some education programs that we host throughout the year that are open to anyone. So if anyone wants to check them out, they're on our YouTube channel. And then I think there's also just an aspect of yes, we're creating those internal connections for the companies we invest in, but we also host a weekly happy hour. Our events are open. A lot of people find their co-founders here, and they're not even part of Startup TNT per se, and they don't even need to be technically even need to be a venture company. A lot of those connections and stuff happen as a result of bringing people together. And I think that's really what it comes down to. It's bringing people together, building this community up, and keeping it grassroots along the way.
6 months ago, Startup TNT announced the closure of its first venture capital fund, which is your first step toward bringing more institutional capital to the early stage venture world. It must be a very exciting time for the business. Talk us through the process of putting that fund together.
Yeah, so we announced the first close of about 2 million of the original target was 5 million. We're going to close it around 3.5 million here this summer. It's all angels, all folks that are already around the table. Turns out, to Jonah's point, $5,000 checks on average. Sometimes they range higher. Sometimes, people are able to go in for as little as 1,000 more. But between one and X, 10, 20, $50,000 checks, a whole bunch of those adds up to a lot of money. And so folks end up getting tapped out. And so the VC fund for us on the retail side, or like with the angels, is to help provide like a little bit more of a level, smooth investment style in the asset class and a more diversified portfolio that's a little bit more sustainable so the community is able to stick around for longer. And then to your point, part of it as well is, getting this fund one down and then working on to fund two, where we're able to work on institutional and investment. And retail being individuals and institutional being folks like Alberta Enterprise Corp or BDC or any sort of the ones where like they're also managing other people's money, pension funds, that sort of thing. And so the game plan, one of the issues that exists in this asset class, like I was saying earlier, too big for friends and family and too small for venture. Venture ends up moving up market and raising more money because the game is essentially how much money you are managing is how much you make. And so everybody tends to move up and write larger checks, and this sort of $1 million or $2 million check size, or the round size, is sort of left behind. And so through the power of community, we want to be investing institutional capital into the communities, but using the communities as the source of the investment decision-making process. And so getting through this fund one and then subsequently working on fund two, where we want to be able to bring that institutional capital down, is the really exciting part for us. Not to suggest that raising $3 or $3.5 million isn't exciting. It's awesome. And we've got like 40 or 45 people that are around a table that have helped make that happen, which is an absolutely wild number. But yeah, really excited for the next one and really helping to solve this venture class.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly exciting, and obviously a big important milestone in the ongoing evolution of the business. And on that theme of evolution, I'm curious, as the company grows and changes, how do you go about building and maintaining a strong team culture at Startup TNT?
I mean, I think this is probably a question for everyone that everyone is always asking themselves as a leader. It probably starts with the hiring process and even kind of the community with Startup TNT in particular. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I started Startup TNT because I was going to their weekly happy hours. I was meeting people. I felt inspired. I was tired of listening to the news and hearing all the negative stories, and I wanted to hear some people who were actually taking action and doing good things in the world. And I think, like, if I look at our team currently, everyone on the team understands there's going to be ups and downs. We're doing something that hasn't really been done, at least in Canada, probably anywhere. Everyone's on the boat and understands, and they're super kind of bought into what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do something new. We're trying to do something that's super community oriented. And I think another part is just making sure the team's empowered. Everyone's here because they want to be. We have a pretty distributed team across prairies and, Western Canada. I think we have some folks in Ontario who work on some projects with us. And so I think that giving them that capability for that ownership is super valuable for them.
We're going to shift gears ever so slightly and learn a little bit more about the ups and downs along the road of Startup TNT's path. Before launching Startup TNT, Tim, you were an entrepreneur. Looking back on the early phase of your career, can you share an economic decision that didn't pan out as you had expected?
Like I was saying, raising that sort of $1 million round is, when you're an entrepreneur, you're like, I don't know, how hard could it possibly be? And then you start to go and do it, and it ends up being trickier. Ironically, same sort of thing with raising a $5 million fund. It's the same teenager size amount of money. And this is prior to my time, but they had raised $300,000 as the sort of pre-seed money to be able to get things off the ground. And again, fantastic. And really challenging. The hard part is how hard you stretch that 300 grand. Do you pay yourselves? Do you have rent? Do you how do you spend that money in a way that's efficient and not going too hard on the efficiency side? Because what happens if you run too lean, you end up burning your people out. And so you need to maintain sustainability in the business by making sure that you don't wreck your people. And so to Jonah's point, and to the question about culture, making sure that your team has the resources that they need and not just running everybody super hard. Startup is super sexy from the outside, and everybody's, Elon Musk is sleeping on the factory floor or whatever the mantra is, or, the fable of the day. Just not running everybody so hard is ultimately an economic decision, right? If you raise more money, you can hire more people, or you have a little bit more time and the stress is a little bit lower. And so it feels like when you're in it, you're like, oh, I shouldn't be spending any of this money. This money isn't mine. It's the investors' money. I need to steward it super well. But if you are too efficient, you end up kind of like running everybody dry, and it becomes unsustainable. And so we exited, in part because it was the smart thing to do, but also in part because it was like everybody was sort of run super dry, and it was like, we need to tie our ship to one that's got a lot more resources and will pay everybody and treat everybody nice.
Yeah, always good when you can, reach to a point through the decisions that you're making or through an exit to take care of yourselves and the people that help you get there. So, happy to hear that was an experience that you were able to have. And I'm sure the people that came along with you on that journey were appreciative of those decisions that you made to balance, as you said, the need to be efficient, but also taking care of the people that helped get you there. So thanks for sharing that. And as a follow-up question for you, Tim, specifically, how does being an entrepreneur yourself shape the way that you work with the startups you support and the advice that you share?
We're effectively an economic development engine. So if you think about it as our job is to help create more startups, our job is to help those startups stay at home and grow from home and ultimately have economic impact at home. And that's the angle that we have with our funding bodies, whether it be government or sponsors or our investors themselves. We're mission oriented. That if you're just coming at it from an economic development angle, it's just sort of like the startups are sort of a cog in the machine, like they're like a product, but these are also people's lives. Like this is huge. You also have to have an idea about, what it is that they're doing or what they're trying to build and how this all actually works. Like this isn't just a function of give money to say Jonah's going to go create a company and it's like, yeah, they just go and do it. They just like do startup stuff, but it's a lot more complicated and a lot more happens around that. And a lot of it is actually serendipitous. And so we place a ton of value on the fact that the process is 8 weeks long and that investors have to get involved. We place a ton of value on the happy hour and come out and meet people. And it's like, who are you going to see? Do we have to register? Who's going to be there? It's like, I don't know, just show up. Like, who knows what's going to happen? Like, part of this game is people are like, oh, it was all luck. It's all luck. And it's like, but you can increase your surface area of luck by showing up and, interacting with people and having people help you. And so again, from the outside, from an economic development angle, it's like, well, just run these investment summits. All you have to do is you just get these people and then they invest and then the startups do startup stuff. It's like, but there's a lot more community to it, and also making sure that the community is pure in its intentions. And so making sure that the right people are around the table. Like I refuse to sell out to folks that I know are say going to charge too much or provide not fantastic value or are going to steer folks in the wrong direction. Like no, we leave money on the table regularly when that's there. And I think that that's really important, which then, leads to good people being around the table and all that sort of stuff. But without that experience, it's just sort of a concept from the outside and kind of a black box as to how startup stuff works. Not that I know everything really by any means. Like we sold super early. Like I know some of the early missteps and like what led to what happened. And like, okay, sure. Like I'm not Peter Thiel or something by any means. Like I'm just trying to figure it out along the way too. Like this is the biggest company that I've had, and this is also part of the game. So
yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, before we shift topics, just curious if either of you can provide an example of a technology, tool, or process that you initially hesitated to implement, but ended up, moving forward with, and that implementation ended up being very highly beneficial. What convinced you to take the leap?
Well, I think dovetailing off of actually our one of our previous comments talking about trust with our investors, trust is key. I mean, you're investing in an inherently very risky asset class, right? It doesn't necessarily return a lot. Don't want to talk about some of the other players in the space, but there's certainly a lot of like get rich quick schemes that are out there. There's certainly high reward potential at the end of the road here. So trust is super important with our investors. And when we started out, we started small. We started this incrementally, and the way that people knew how to transfer money was indirect e-transfer here in Canada. That's how you transfer money. So we were doing that, and then things started getting a bit bigger. People wanted to do bigger checks. We would just say, send it over 7 days. You have a limit each day. Just send it over 7 days. We'll manage it. We'll make it work. And one of those technologies is actually Plooto that really revolutionized things for us. And it was a huge risk because we're like, even if this software makes it smoother, like the process smoother for our investors, if it leaves some investors feeling like I don't trust this brand anymore or something goes wrong, then like it tarnishes the whole brand. It tarnishes our reputation. It's harder for them to, they won't tell their friends, which is predominantly how this thing spreads through community. And so implementing that was a huge kind of, initial risk. So we did some pilots, but since we've implemented it, we syndicate millions of dollars a year if you can think about that in $5,000 e-transfers and the reconciliation amount of time that takes to do, and the struggle for an investor to have to remember each day to go into their bank and like do that, the amount of time that saves for both, and the value that provides to even the startups for the amount of like, I won't do a bigger check because I have to transfer more money, and so, or I have to pay a $50 wire fee or whatever it is. I think Plooto actually, it was been quite revolutionary in that regard, and we're quite happy with Plooto for that regard. But it definitely felt like a big risk at the start.
Yeah, of course. And, happy to hear that you guys have had such a positive experience, but you highlighted something that's so critical. And that's when it comes to money or funds, you really only get one shot. And the first mistake you make, it's game over, right? There's no going back on, hey, I accidentally sent the wrong amount or at the wrong day, and now we're in the hole, we're in the red, or, oh, this person needed this money 3 days ago, and because there was a mix up at the bank, or so-and-so sent it to the wrong client. You do those once, maybe twice, if you're lucky, to get a second chance. And that could spell the end in a lot of ways. So you're right. It's important, especially when you're exploring, fintech solutions or fintech partners, to really understand your risk tolerance, the partner that you're choosing and their own, risk mitigation approaches and the practices and policies that they put in place to protect not only your money, but your vendor's money or your partner's money, or your client's money, or whatever money's flowing through. Because like I said, if things go bad once, there's no going back from that in a lot of ways. I'm going to transition into our next subject, and this is our rapid fire section. So I'm going to throw some your way, and whoever's best prepared to tackle them, feel free, and we'll get right into it. So the Saskatchewan government recently doubled the cap on startup investor tax credits. How significant do you think that is?
I'll say significant. So rapidly significant. Notably, Alberta does not have an investor tax credit. I also don't think that is necessarily a bad thing for Alberta. Like, I think there are two approaches to solve what's underlying the same problem, which is wanting investors to be active off the sidelines and investing in the local community. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. And so what I'm really excited about from the Saskatchewan perspective is that they're increasing the budget. They have government support to be allocating dollars into this space, and they place it as a priority. That, I think, absent like the ways in which and the mechanics of which that happens, I think that's an absolutely fantastic thing for the community. And so, yeah, I'm really, really excited. And the Saskatchewan folks are too.
Are there any unique advantages for startups operating in Canada as opposed to elsewhere?
We talked a little bit about or earlier about how startups are operating generally and some of the challenges. But I think, Canada, one of the huge things is just cost. Like, labor's cheaper, cost of living is cheaper. So, if labor is kind of your major aspect of what's going to push you forward, having those is a huge advantage. And government support. There's also a lot of government support.
And Jonah, another one for you. What qualities are essential for a successful operations team at a startup?
Yeah, I think having solid foundations is key. So I think the first thing is you got to make sure you hire the right people. So, the old adage goes, hire slow, fire fast. So hiring good people, getting good people around the table that are all on the boat. And then I think once you've got the good people, on the bus, then the key is to make sure everyone has a good grasp of, we're all rowing in the same direction. And like, what do I need to do? And what are the bumpers on my role that, help me to, go towards the vision and have the full capacity and ability to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for navigating the rapid fire portion of the conversation. We'll shift into the last few questions I want to throw your way before I let you go. So my first one is, what are some of the most exciting trends in the startup world? How do you expect the startup landscape to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I'd be remiss not to talk about AI. But I won't go down the path that like everybody else will talk about, because everybody's already heard those talking points. What makes me excited as sort of an investor in the space, everybody's generally focused on sort of like the hallmark is like B2B SaaS. So like business to business, software sales, because you can expand, you have businesses are generally relatively price agnostic, like they're not price agnostic, but they're like, they have the ability to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you can also sell them more products and you can sell to more businesses. So there's this like geometric growth that exists in that asset class. The thing that happens with AI though, is it's, people have noticed that it's a lot easier to build a software product. And so one of the things that I think that'll happen over the next sort of 5 to 10 years is there's these big sort of aggregators. So, staying in the sort of fintech space, if you think of, there's sort of 2 or 3 big accounting software solutions out there. And so far as like QuickBooks and Sage and maybe Wave, they're pretty general. And so they're, and they're fine for a lot of businesses, but a lot of folks will talk about how they're like not the best from a UI perspective and whatever. there's probably, because, through AI, you can code really efficiently, you can develop things extremely quickly and also efficiently from like a people perspective. Midjourney, for example, only like has less than 100 employees, and the vast majority of them are actually in the accounting team. And so, you can build a software solution really effectively. And I think that what's going to happen in the B2B SaaS space, for especially, is that instead of these sort of like growing in big companies like Salesforce and HubSpot and whatever, what I think you'll end up happening is a pile of really individual industry, like very specific software stacks for science companies and education and whatever. Like it's all going to sort of segment out because the software can be specific to that problem. And maybe it'll be bundled under one thing, but it's so easy to create software that I think it'll sort of differentiate out and have a whole bunch of different targets. And then with having small, like ultimately that means a smaller ultimate size of the company. And so that means maybe the returns aren't necessarily there in that space. And so where I think the returns still exist, and where we've seen it actually through COVID and stuff has made it really apparent, is the deep tech space in general. So scientists and spinning things out from universities and whatnot. And so things like life sciences or clean tech or ag tech, or where you're dealing with hardware, you're dealing with scientific stuff, chemicals and whatever. So we've invested in an mRNA therapeutic. We've invested in medical devices. We've invested in a bunch of stuff that's in that space, because it's not a function of like the AI, LLM software is going to eat the world side of things. It's like, no, we're building stuff that's going to save lives. We're building stuff that's going to change the world. And there's only so many of those things that exist, and it can be a winner take all in that space too. So I think that's really exciting. And so it's incumbent on the investors to, either learn yourself, or in our case, make sure that we build a community of a whole bunch of smart folks that are able to help diligence these things, which to date has been a quite successful strategy for us.
Absolutely. And circling back on a comment that I think, Tim, you made earlier around burnout and managing, operational efficiency and not spreading your people too thin. I can only imagine operating a business of the size of Startup TNT and, obviously the partners that you work with can be challenging at times. So I'm curious, what techniques do each of you use to avoid burnout yourselves, or even burnout on behalf of your teams?
Well, I think tone from the top is really important. That was one of the issues that I was referencing back in the day. It was like, we have to get this thing all the way across the line. We don't have any money. We need to work 16 hours a day, and weekends are just a day that ended in Y. So we're just pounding through. And that's like absolutely not the case here. That was early 20s, and now I'm, in my 30s. And so, I think the moral of the story here, and I've chosen to stay in Edmonton, right? Like if I was wanting to hustle and grind, I'd be like moving to New York and doing finance, because that's the background. But the game plan is to build a community organization. And so, for me, it's, look, there's only really, let's say that there's 8 hours in the day that are reasonably productive. And even then it's like a relatively smaller subset where you're actually productive. I think understanding that and internalizing it and recognizing that there's a bajillion problems that can be solved and need to be solved in a business, but really there's only so many that you can do. And so it's a function of delegating or doing, and only so many that you can do in the day. Because if you run yourself too thin, you'll blow yourself up, and it'll be game over from there. And so if you want to build like a lasting business, there's times where you need to sprint, of course, like things are going to blow up. And so, you need to solve them. You need to work the weekend. You need to do stuff. But on a day-to-day, it's like, sure, come up with a schedule that makes sense for you, and then also make sure to stick to it, because the list of stuff that needs to be done doesn't end. And so just knowing when to walk away and make sure that you maintain balance. And I've got the dog that was drinking water a little earlier. He's taking a nap. You need to do that every once in a while too. The name of the game is to just get out, make sure you have friends, make sure you have community that are able to help support in what's otherwise a pretty lonely adventure if you're just working away.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like the community that you guys are building over there, even something as simple as, like you said, the meetups are going a long way to feel like they're not at this alone, that there are others that they can go to with probably problems that they think they're facing just themselves, but others have experienced themselves as well. And just knowing that there's other out there going through the same problems, navigating the same challenges goes a long way. All right. Well, listen, Jonah and Tim, it's been great getting to chat with you. The space that you both operate in is not one that I personally am very familiar with. And I think, to your point, Tim, that kind of started this conversation. You look at it from the outside and you think of this really, sexy space. There's all this money, there's all this activity, all this, like you said, ego and bravado. But when you start to peel it back, and kind of what I've learned through this conversation is that a lot of the challenges that you as a business are facing, or even some of the businesses in your portfolio are facing, are very similar to the ones that businesses in really most industries and of any size and scale are experiencing, whether it's making the right financial decisions, taking things slowly, building a community of partners or people that you can lean on. A lot of these problems or challenges are very, translatable. So I appreciate you both sharing your own experiences and your own advice on how to navigate those. And I'm sure, listeners, regardless of the spaces that they're operating in or the businesses that they work in or that they own, or the clients that they work with, will get a tremendous amount of value from your insights and guidance. So thank you both for sharing. And before I let you go, one last question, and that's, where can people learn more about both you and Startup TNT?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate you and the team for having us on. And thanks for taking the time to ask such insightful questions. But to the question, you can find us on LinkedIn, any of us individually. And then also our website, startuptnt.com. And you can find us as well at happy hours in every city in Western Canada. So Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Regina, Saskatoon, and Winnipeg.
Awesome. Yeah. And if any listeners decided to attend one of those happy hours, feel free to drop that you heard about it here. Always great to see, us play maybe even a small role in the growth of your community and what you guys are doing out there. So yeah, looking forward to hearing how that goes. Awesome. Well, again, thank you both. It was great getting to chat with you, and I really appreciate you coming on.
No, really appreciate you having us. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
That's all for today's episode of Greater Than the Sum. I hope you all got some great takeaways from our guest. Remember, taking control of your finances is within reach, and it's not as complicated as it seems. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can check out more about Plooto on Plooto.com for resources, tips, and advice on how to get control over your cash flow. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, let us know on LinkedIn, Instagram, or X. See you next time.